Hi everybody, thanks for this intimate gathering. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Penda O'Donoghue and I am a sales manager in LCS looking after Africa and Israel. I also work very closely with the Afro-Googler network, so absolutely delighted to have Andrew Fairbairn joining us today. So he's the founder of Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, which is a charity that helps students, top talented students from ethnic backgrounds and underprivileged backgrounds get into great careers, both in business and technology, etc. So places like Google, ideally. And he's been with them for 17 years, having gone through the program himself and worked with SEO in the US. So he's now based in the UK, and we're delighted to have him here talking to us about how we can make inclusion real. So over to you, Andrew. Thank you for coming.
So thank you for having me. I like to talk. I talk a lot. I put this together sort of specifically for you guys. It's a bit of a cobbling together of a variety of different themes, so I may not be as practiced with this particular slide deck as I might be. But my name's, again, Andrew Fairbairn. I'm blessed, really, to be the founder of this organization in London. I went through an earlier iteration of it in 1995. I got my first exposure to the high-end sort of professional services world with an internship through SEO at Lehman Brothers way back then. It opened my eyes to what was possible for me personally, and it essentially changed my life in that sense. I wasn't necessarily coming down some terrible path where I was, on my way to wrath and ruin, but it was one of those things where nobody in my family had ever been a banker or a consultant or a lawyer or any of those sorts of hotshot professions, never mind software programmer, but this, remember, is 1995, so it was a different era in software too. I came to London a few years after that experience and started it here, so I'll get into some of the history of the program along the way. Number one thing, I'm really pleased to be here and really glad to have interest in what we're talking about. So, here we go. I don't have a clicker.
Yes,
You'll be my man. All right, beautiful. Thank you, sir. So SEO London is, as you say, it's an organization dedicated to trying to find opportunities for people who have all the potential and all of the ability, but don't, by virtue of their circumstance, necessarily have all the access. It's kind of that simple. And so, there are a variety of different areas where we focus on, but predominantly, we're looking for people who are historically underrepresented in a given industry. We're looking for people who are coming up the hard way, and that can be really any ethnicity at the end of the day. Just if someone really needs a leg up, we want to be there for them, and so on. The way we sort of have grown over the years, we have programs for secondary schoolers, years 11 to 13. So if you're a 15-year-old and you're not sure up from down, which most 15-year-olds don't, certainly I didn't, you need some guidance. And so we provide a multi-industry work experience where imagine a 15-year-old going and doing a work experience at an ad agency, and then an investment bank, and then a corporate law firm, and then an engineering firm, and perhaps even a Google. They then come out of that experience by the time they're year 13, knowing a lot about a lot of stuff, and knowing why they might want to follow a particular path or not. And we layer that with all sorts of mentoring and training and life skills and so on to ensure that the students are actually rock stars. Super ninjas, we call them, by the time they get to university. We don't force them down a university path, to be clear. They can go on apprenticeships, underwater basket weaving, whatever people want to do, that's cool. We just want to make sure that they have awareness of all the different things they could be doing if they so chose to follow a path. The careers program is all about university students. Simple enough to define, but we look for talent everywhere. So we are currently, I think we have just over 5,000 applications in the queue right now, and we've been on campus for just a month. For us, that's sort of a record, actually, for the scale of the operation we work with. We've got 750 students going through that program every year across multiple industries, and we'll put up the obligatory logo slide later so you'll see what that's about. But there again, it's about exposure, it's about experience, it's about life skills on top of the technical skills to grow and thrive. We work with Google in this space right now as people are at the end of their university career crossing over into sort of graduate. And so we work with the sales and marketing team there. That's been a great little relationship. SEO Connect is our museum store within the museum. insofar as that's actually a for-profit entity it's a tiny piece of our overall operation, to be clear. But it is where we we have a jobs board, for instance, where we have people come on board there, and it just looks and smells and feels like any old jobs board that you might imagine. But we also, through that program, run a lot of different events. So I was just mentioning earlier, we're going to be running an event on venture capital, for instance. A lot of the folks who come through our programs, and over the years we have thousands upon thousands of alumni. A lot of them are sort of highly trained, highly professional, highly motivated type A personalities who are interested in doing other things. And access to VC knowledge would be something really interesting for them. So we run that through the Connect end of our work. If you could click the button once. All of that wouldn't really differentiate us in many ways from a lot of other organizations in the world, except that this particular line it's an SEO mantra. It's not about you, it's about the people who come after you. That suffuses everything we do. So no decision gets made without that being sort of a part of it. I got into SEO in '95 because of people who came before me, who sort of broke ground and made possible my presence in that rarefied world of Wall Street. When people come through our doors today, they're essentially creating relationship space, relationship capital, where if they're able to prove their abilities in a difficult competitive work environment, in an elite setting, that opens the doors for others to come behind them. An example, it wouldn't have been so long ago that imagine you're in a Wall Street setting, you're on a trading floor, and there's $1 billion, pound, euro block trade that's going through. The thing has to be sold, it's got to be sold fast, and who on that desk is going to get the bulk of that order? That's the problem to solve for the manager of the desk. They look around and they say, who do I trust? Who do I know is just going to get this done? And boom. If that person was black or Muslim or Asian not too long ago, the odds that they were going to get that opportunity to execute that block trade would have been smaller than otherwise. The world is changing, the world has changed. We can be very grateful for all that's occurring around us, but we want to be able to ensure that we have excellent people in place, well-trained, trained to not just survive in these environments, but thrive. And if we've done our job well, next time that block trade or that big project or whatever comes up, it's going to be fair play to everyone in the room, because everyone is shown to have proven their worth, proven their ability, and if we've done our job well, we'll have been a part of that success and that training. Can we jump to the next one? We have a virtuous cycle. We go out and take sponsorship donations from large corporates like a Google, and we go into the world, and we go to all these different universities, we bring together an applicant pool, we screen them, we scrub them, they sort them, they sift them, we decide who do we think in this group can most benefit from our help, but also if we help them, we'll go really, really far. And those are sort of two drivers. And who do we think, if we assist, will be able to then draw a community behind them to sort of really embed through their hard work, dedication, success, and applied talent, a change for all concerned. The firms that are sponsoring them, the people coming in behind them. So we find folks, we try and create lasting outcomes, and again, it's not about you, it's about the people coming after you. We want people to be giving back. I have no interest, frankly, in working with someone who thinks that they're going to make it, it's all about them, it's all about their own success, and they're master of their own domain. Useless. That is not someone who's going to help our organization in our social mission. If I was a recruiting agency and I just wanted to get bums in seats and take a commission, maybe I would do that. But I have no time for that in my world. That permits the potential of a virtuous cycle to occur. We just had a milestone last year, actually, a really, really cool milestone, where a woman from our very first class in 2000 made partner at Goldman Sachs. And I mean, she's at the top of her game. And she's on our board now, and she's giving back, and she's leading the way for others. I got a call from a guy, he said, hey, do you know Nishi over at Goldman? I used to work with her. She had a great relationship with SEO. I'd like to bring on SEO at my firm. Can we talk? And if I can advance a couple more points. And one more. I heard about you from. Happens all the time. Most of those 5,000 applications we had came in before we got to campus. Word of mouth. Brothers, sisters, cousins, nephews, relations. We heard, I interviewed this fantastic candidate the other day who heard about us from someone in Canada, who heard about us from someone in Nigeria, who heard about us from someone. It was this sort of, this global network was all over the place. We love that. That is lifeblood, because that means that we're actually, the thesis that relationships matter, and getting in one person at the sort of I'll call it a spear point of diversity, if you like, permits, it's the thin end of the wedge. Permits the fat end of the wedge to actually be embedded in an organization. Likewise, it facilitates the sort of alumni-driven network, whether it's that alumna at Goldman Sachs or the people who came right after her. And if you go, for instance, to a Citibank right now, from managing director level all the way to entry-level analysts, we've got dozens of people who all understand this, all understand when you're a new person entering that sphere, that you have a network to join into. And that's really cool, and that allows more pervasive culture of diversity. And I'll get to that as we go further. So this is the history lesson. I enter the fray somewhere about here, just before 2000. Way back in 1963, the saint of a guy, Mike Oshowitz, set up a program, the spirit of the 60s. Kennedy, I think, was still president. To help kids from tough high school backgrounds get into universities, focused on New York City. Over the years, it was a very successful program, but sort of looking at the results a number of years later, in 1980, it was determined that these kids were getting into university, they were getting great training, but they weren't getting the jobs. They're getting jobs. But we all know there's a difference between the jobs and just jobs. And so, a careers program was founded, and that's what I participated in. That was my ticket when I came out of university and ended up at Lehman Brothers, and just that opened my eyes. The scales fell, and I could see the world in a whole new light. And it was like, oh my gosh, if I do this and that, I could accomplish a few things. I ended up working at UBS, then Deutsche Bank in a variety of different functions, transactional and strategy jobs. And I was here I was in London. Sorry. This morning I was in London. It was looking out on the trading floor of the equity sales team could have used some diversity, shall we say. The corporate finance equity research departments could have used some diversity. So I approached the head of training and development and said, hey, can we do this SEO thing? I mean, it's pretty good. I was smiled at, but ultimately supported. I had one awkward conversation with a fellow who ran recruiting for a major investment bank. He sort of essentially metaphorically patted me on the head and said, that's a really nice American concept that you're bringing to the UK. We don't have a race problem in this country. We have a class problem. That's what. So, anyway. Anyway, so we took off, and on the back of a pilot on my credit card, we were able to get a successful pilot program going, and then .bomb occurred. I was doing sort of, at that point, sort of fintech 1.0 venture investing on the bank's balance sheet as pets.com was crashing. It was a messy time. I ended up going back to New York, and much of the rest of my involvement over time has been on the board. I've only recently come back in the last year to assist. But while I was doing my 2 or 3 other careers, alumni from the New York program launched in China, Hong Kong, and Shanghai. Then in Saigon or Ho Chi Minh, we have SEO Vietnam. We launched a scholars program. Just as in New York they started with secondary schoolers and went to sort of university, we started with university, and we were doing so well, and we're seeing such great growth and such a robust response from the community that we started our scholars program. We went backwards. And we've since then launched our Connect program, which I described earlier, and we have a program in Accra, in Ghana, which is actively looking at Lagos in Nigeria as a potential expansion point. It goes on. I've been involved in discussions about SEO Bogota. I've been involved in about SEO Rio and Sao Paulo. And one of our staffers was from Afghanistan. He was going back to Kabul. I was only half joking when I said we should be talking about SEO Kabul, man, because it's a universal concept that there are those who have access and those that do not have access. And to my mind, it is a clear statement to say that there is money being left on the table if everyone's not involved. And so my sense is that we have an opportunity to do more here. Can we flip? Back here, it's important to note, like, you couldn't find a diversity officer in the City of London in 2000. Maybe someone, cared about it. There are a few management consultants floating around talking about it. There's maybe one organization that I could identify back then called the Windsor Fellows that was doing some work on it in a serious capacity. Now it's an industry. There are dozens of organizations that attempted to promote diversity in some way, shape, or form. And in many ways, you could call it a golden age for diversity and inclusion. The phones are ringing off. Like every week, I get 1 or 2 calls from some organization looking to learn more about what we do because they're trying to embed more diversity and inclusiveness in their culture. That's fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic. I'm here. You guys are talking about it. We're in a really interesting place. I just sort of sit back and do a little victory dance every time I hear about some new program that's coming up because we're a charity. No one's getting rich off of this. What we care about is the social change, the long-term impact of this, and we see that happening all around us. The City of London today, and we should talk about Dublin because I don't know much about what's going on in Dublin and diversity. The City of London today is radically different, completely different than what it was before. There's still lots of people clambering and getting into jobs. Lots of ground still to get to cover, but let me tell you, 2000, this wasn't even a thing. So, shall we? So, the obligatory logo slide, and here you guys are. And you should know, in banking and corporate finance, Wall Street terms, up and to the left is the premier spot where you could possibly be on any slide deck. So if I'm presenting to a corporate law firm, there may be some adjustment of slides and logos, but you are in the prime spot today, guys. So we started with banking. We've seen a surge of interest in asset management firms in the last year. I mean, like, it's night and day. It's really remarkable to see what's been occurring. Law firms have been focused on this for a number of years. And we have sort of a hodgepodge of firms that come in and out of our consulting, corporate and technology world. These programs are deeply mature. They are deeply at scale. We've been doing them for a very long time. Corporates, technology firms tend to be very different one to the other. And so you have different sort of strategies for dealing with them. The engineering program is a fantastic program at the Royal Academy, where we're training up young people from typically less sought after universities. In the UK, you describe them as the post-92 universities, polytechnics that became universities not so long ago. And that's just driving some great results as well. So anyway, lots of flashy logos. You're in the top left. That's the takeaway. All right. So we can shifting gears a little bit. So diversity as a whole, it's a lot of things. We tend to focus on these 3. I sort of refer to ethnicity, ethnic diversity, gender diversity, and social mobility diversity as the big 3. Disability, LGBT, we are deep supporters and in love with anyone who's going to sort of work on that front. We have all the empathy in the world. We just don't have scale. And I think at Google, you know about scale. To be effective, we want to be able to help as many people as possible, and you need the systems to do it. We have the systems here. So that being said, I was going to throw the question to you guys. I mean, I don't know what, not so long ago, I became 39 forever. There's a, I had an interesting company. We were at a consulting firm, and we were having sort of a lunch and learn. We were just having this kind of a discussion about what is difference in that context. And this woman raised her hand. She said, I don't fit any sort of the classic diversity categories that you were searching for, but I feel really left out in a lot of instances because I didn't come in with that original class. If certain firms, you come in, you're marked. You started as a graduate, as a first year, and you work your way up through the system, and you have a certain set of common attributes and experiences that come from that. If you come in as an experienced hire, you're coming in as you don't have that network, you don't have that stamp, and so lateral hires then is an interest. I mean, it's something to consider. We're talking about difference here. Refugees, we're meeting with a group that focuses on this issue in particular. They have a different approach. They need to have a different approach. And I don't think anybody can help the people who like Marmite, but that's another thing entirely. So can I ask, is there a diversity officer in the room or someone who's deeply embedded in that world here? Okay. Do these categories resonate here? Yeah. Does this one resonate particularly? So great moment of the value of diversity at work. I was going to bring a PowerPoint presentation before I was laughed at. And now I have to now clearly have to learn how to port all of my PowerPoint, in which I've built my whole life and career, into Google Sheets or slides. There it is. Anyway, so you should discriminate against me or train me or teach me would be better yet, right? Can I see one more slide up here? So that's sort of the meta picture, if you like. But it's interesting. We have conversations about diversity in all sorts of different places, and it shifts, it moves. I had Switzerland. What does diversity mean in Switzerland? Does anyone have any idea what diversity means in Switzerland? What would you expect it to mean? To be a Swiss national. I mean, isn't that? I mean, that would not have been my first answer upon going after it. In Brazil, whole other set of dynamics. There's north, there's south, there's urban, rural, there's any manner of things going on. In China, SEO staff leading that effort, who are all doing this on a volunteer basis, were challenged by Chinese students saying, is this some sort of CIA thing? Because this is free and you're giving us this access. You're American, what's going on here? It's really a program for sort of aspiring young Chinese students who don't have the access to get into these top jobs. It's a 95% Han Chinese community. It's not like ethnicity was the driver. And yet you have this whole other set of issues where people are worrying about political intrigue instead of just getting the opportunity. It's okay, we can go ahead. Actually, why don't we push one more button and see what happens? One more time. So, one of the interesting things about the conversations in diversity is that when we started, most of our focus was on ethnic diversity. But over time, that fellow sort of patted me on the head and said, we have a class issue in this country. A report came out not so long ago in the UK, Social Mobility Commission, one or two grandees attached to it, I'm sure, saying that for the first time in the measured history of race relations and social mobility in the UK, poor white working class males were the number one sort of disadvantaged group in the UK. And we live in an age of I'm going to stay away from politics, but when you think about the rise of a Trump, the rise of a Brexit focus, a lot of folks have been left behind in the UK who are white, working class, and in a ethnic diversity definition of diversity are being ignored. And so at SEO we spend a ton of time on Faria, and we spend a ton of time on Billy as well, because it's just necessary to reflect in the community. Essentially, they're great people with great talent, great performance, but they're up against different challenges. A Faria, maybe she's Muslim, and by virtue of that is sort of culturally not permitted to shake someone's hand, a man's hand, who is not in her immediate family. I mean, maybe she wants to pray 5 times a day, in the middle of a trainee program to get into a law firm, that's very, if you're not expecting it, you're not looking for it, you don't know what it is, to observe her doing this, that can throw you for a loop. Billy may have the wrong accent. Billy may have the wrong references. Billy may support the wrong football team. There's a whole range of other things that can get in the way of a Billy, just as they might with a Faria. They have different challenges, but conceptually, we're talking about difference, we're talking about acceptance, we're talking about maximizing the pool of talent available to a given firm. And in that case, we see a need for what we do all across the map. Let me try that. So, every firm we work with is really focused on entry-level graduate recruitment. Because it's obvious. It's like we need, we can find. And it's essentially recruitment in the talent attraction and selection business as such has really become a commodity. There are lots of organizations out there seeking to do that. We had one huge investment bank come to us and say, we don't need you guys for attraction because we get hundreds of thousands of applications every year from all sorts of people, but no one trains them like you do. And so we see this as sort of kind of the easy part of it. Getting out to universities, getting people to apply, screening people, straightforward manipulation of a spreadsheet much of the time. Assessment, sort of a deeper assessment about personal traits, qualifications, and so on, and finally bring up, this is the easy part. And one more, please. Retention is really where I see the future of all of this working out. If you've gone out and recruited, year after year, this great, wonderful recruiting budget, a whole bunch of new and different faces, that's wonderful. But if they're all sort of veering off, 1 to 2 to 3 years into the mix, you've wasted a lot of money, frankly. Now, we can talk about the millennial generation and people who want to be in a place for 2 or 3 years and they want to move on, and that's just the new, gig culture inside corporates. But fundamentally, I would like to think that a Googler, if they spend a little more time at Google, retain more and more institutional memory, are able to sort of scale their own networks and their own social capital with benefit to others internally. If you've got a bunch of people who've only been here for 2 years, where's the institutional knowledge, where's the institutional memory, where's the scalability? And so a couple of observations, maybe we need to be measuring this. How do you measure it? Very few people are measuring it. It's like the next obvious point. But I don't know anyone, frankly, any firm that we work with that is aggressively measuring this because it's sensitive. It's politically fraught with peril. If you're going to ask people, you'll be tracking people. In Europe, in some jurisdictions, it's illegal. In France, prefer to stick their head in the sand and not deal with the issue and have it bubble up all around them than actually deal with it head on. And I think a lot of places are like that. So another element of this is promotion, which is, who gets promoted? I used that example earlier, sort of the $1 billion pound euro block trade. Who's getting the opportunity to do the cool work? I don't know what that would be in this context, but who's getting the opportunity to actually make a difference, such that they can get promoted? There was a recent, I chatted with a guy who's at a law firm, major law firm, who it had gone through a restructuring, a fairly dramatic restructuring, and a lot of people were laid off. And this individual, who's a black man, said to me, he didn't believe that there was racism or discrimination going on as such in the fact that 7 out of 8 sort of black associates were laid off. He said he didn't think that was the issue. He said they were genuinely less qualified, less important to the business. But the question was, who was staffing them so they actually could become important to the business? And that resonates with me because I think a lot of what we find around us and a lot of the issues that we see, and we'll get to it in sort of one of the last pages, is around this notion of giving people an opportunity to succeed and promotion, build that internal social, professional capital. commitment. So 2 simple observations. I don't know how many of you, if there's a lot of turnover in organizations at large, HR departments, especially the graduate recruitment departments, they flip like nobody's business. It's unbelievable how many times we have to sort of change our, we'll come back and communicate and recommunicate and over-communicate what we do to a new generation of HR professionals. So people are always moving, and that's sort of a fact of life. But that's not just for the recruitment folks, that's all up and down an organization. So people who you have support for this premise in the organization will go. And who's going to replace them? So the firm has to be committed. And if you don't have people in the executive suite on board, forget about it. Frankly, it's just window dressing. You need to have people occupied at the very senior levels. I'm really pleased to say at a place like Aberdeen Asset Management, which has recently gone through a merger, their CEO came and spoke to our candidates. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. And one of the interesting things that's occurred over time is that way back in the day, 2000, in my case, you had a situation where diversity was new. People didn't know what to do with it. And so it became, in terms of dealing with it as a strategic priority of an organization, it went all the way to the top because there's no one in the middle to sort of figure out what to do with it. And over time, the bigger firms have really embedded diversity into what they're trying to accomplish, but it means that the eye is off the ball in many respects for many big firms from what's happening in sort of diversity intake and management, because it's been pushed down so many levels. Where we see, so what I'm trying to say is, without that support, you start to get drift. You start to have conversations, really unfortunate conversations. I had this one, I'm paraphrasing slightly, but major consulting firm who shall not be named called and said, essentially, Andrew, we need 5 black people. I need them in the next 2 months, and I'll pay you $2,000 a head. That's the conversation that you get when the senior folks aren't paying attention, because it's been devolved so far down the chain. It's just somebody who's got a bums and seats mentality, and that's all they're trying to accomplish. So my response was, no, we can't do that, by the way. We could, but we don't want to do that. That's not the discussion that we want to get engaged in. Sure. Okay, so a series of tiles will pop up, and each one sort of leads to the other, and it sort of tracks the evolution of what we've seen in London in the last 17 years. So I'm going to be nudging you a little bit. So does anyone at Google feel there isn't a diversity problem? Is it sort of acknowledged that, people exist? Well, I think that's what you tend to see as you go forward through the tiles. There's always someone who is 1 or 2 or 3 tiles behind, always. So we move from denial to acceptance, and then eventually you get a sense across the industry. What we've seen occur is that a lot of different underfunded, groups started to pop up saying, "We've got to do something about this," and but it's my part-time job, and I have 10 other things to do, and my budget is £1,200. Can you help me? So you get this sort of a lot of underweight efforts. Through all that, a handful of firms emerge as being really committed and really sort of showing they know what needs to get done. And that's an exciting moment, because you start to see sort of people taking ahead, leading the pack. And soon enough, because HR folks have all sorts of conferences that they go to, and they start talking about what they're doing at this firm, what they're doing at that firm. No one admits that anyone has a problem, but here's the cool things they're doing. We see best practices, in air quotes, coming along, because that's it's the solidification of some of the early experiments. It starts to occur, and we keep going. And suddenly, and it's really interesting. Like I'm on LinkedIn, and there's like diversity awards this, and there's diversity expert this, and everyone's a diversity speaker on that, and so it's fun to watch. I mean, it's everywhere. And these are folks who have now at the cutting edge of sort of some of the early experiments. And like we said, there's always someone who's still back here. And someone who's like, yeah, okay, but I don't know what to do about it. Yeah, well, I don't have a lot of time or money for this. But there's, we're certainly at a point in many places today where there's experts everywhere. And so I think right now, diversity has become very mainstream. And there, as I said, there are people still at the very beginning of the first tile. But it's an exciting time because another firm we worked at, they hired a slate of I think it was 6 new entrants into their firm for a particular division and a particular role, all white male from Oxbridge. I'm sure they're all perfectly well talented, but one of the leaders in that team was a senior woman, and she was furious that her business, which was built around working with female entrepreneurs, was not going to be supported by, if that was going to be the status quo, that was not helping her in her business. You have people all up and down sort of a spectrum, but you see movement. And so that firm will then come to an SEO London or a group that might be something like us and say, how can we help that? The next year, by the way, apparently it was 6 women who were hired. So it was some yin and yang came on, and hopefully now it's more 3 and 3 and 4s and 2s at this stage. Can we keep going? And so, yeah, now, some industries are back here. Certainly in a few industries we see, particularly the law firms and the investment banks. It used to be that you'd blithely go out in April and try and recruit for September of the same year. And that was what was done. Now, we have a secondary school program where firms are looking to draw in pipeline talent from that early on to ensure that they have the numbers in gross form, so by the time it's whittled down to their recruiting class, that they have the people they need and want. We've been living the war for talent for a long time. You guys, the Googles of the world, are absolutely putting pressure on all the big banks and law firms and consulting firms, because what you do has a certain je ne sais quoi. It's so much more interesting than prospectuses. But you'll tell me if that's true. Maybe they've got it all wrong. I don't know. Can we go to the next? I talked about retention. I think this is the next front. I think that people are starting to wake up to this. Is they've done a bunch of experiments. They're trying to figure out what's going on. The people who can talk the talk. Some people are walking the walk, and now they're saying, well, sort of like what occurred back with Mike Oshowitz in New York. You're getting kids into university, but not necessarily into the jobs. We're getting a lot of folks in, but are they staying? And it's the next evolutionary step. One more step. And so, yeah, this is, I think of the whole diversity and inclusion agenda as something totally solvable. I mean, it just requires will. It requires, focus. And the reality is that big firms have a lot of other things to focus on. And I genuinely believe that the people, our counterparts at many of these firms sincerely believe and love and want to sort of embrace and advance the cause of diversity. I really believe that. There'll be a few exceptions that you see come and go. But I think most of the people we deal with on the other side of the table sponsoring our activities really believe that they're doing what they want to, trying to accomplish these goals. But they're under budgeted, they're understaffed. And so they're forced into this world where they're being shouted at from above to hit numbers, to do this, do that, the other, and they're given a tiny budget to do it. And so, is the answer just throw more money at it? I don't know. I think it's a cultural question. I don't think it necessarily requires that. If you start to figure this, if firms start to figure out retention, a lot of the upfront investment and experimentation, it solves itself. And some firms have figured it out, but most are figuring it out. Okay, so this is. Each one of these topics could be a book, a HBO miniseries, you name it. But I figured we'd close on this, and we could, as we go through this, we can open it up and have a little bit more dialogue back and forth. I think I know the answer to this, but how many people have heard of the topic unconscious bias? So everyone's heard of the topic, right? It's everywhere. I don't need to go into it. I think the point is that this is on the lips of every diversity inclusion group. This is about as mainstream as things get. But it's not just think about the bias that we all face. Try being a Rohingya Muslim in Myanmar right about now. Try being a South Korean in Japan. In Singapore, this highly modern society, there's a lot of tribalism between Chinese, Malay, and Indian populations. A lot of those lines don't cross. This is a global issue. I think in the West, sort of I'll call it the US and Western Europe, there's a lot of very positive work going on. We should, I think, as a society, sort of be patting ourselves on the back at some level, but just knowing that there's a hell of a lot more work to be done. The fact is that there's movement in the right direction. It's really, you get, I think of racism or sexism or ageism, I think it's just, prejudice gone wrong in a situation where there's uneven power. And power flips. My father, who is a white guy, was in Jamaica for many years, and where I was raised for much of my childhood. And super well qualified guy, PhD in this and that, in his specialty, experienced a lot of racism. It's just, he was in a black dominant country with a power base that was not favoring him. So it works both ways, is a reality. My mother, who is black then, from Jamaica coming up to Boston, experienced sort of the flip side of it, right? So it goes both ways. It's really about where is there imbalance. So much of our work, whether we want to call it unconscious bias or whatever, is dealing with power dynamics, just making sure there's as much evenness as possible, and you're never going to get rid of, this whole Harvey Weinstein thing in Hollywood right now is all about power. It's that simple. It's going to happen. It's never going away as long as there are humans in the world. But we can at least start to address the power dynamics and the opportunities. So, good enough expediency. I think a lot of the challenge we face is just because people are dealing with what's good enough. The story of C, because I just want to name my dear friend C. Coming up at Deutsche Bank years ago, our team was growing fast, and we needed to hire someone really fast. And we needed someone really good and really qualified. So we went to the HR department and said, we need someone fast. And they sent over C. And he was awesome. He was so good. He was like the best thing we could have had. And then we went back and said, the team kept growing. We said, we need another person. We need a new person. Like, C, who'd you know? And C went and found G, say. And G came on board, and he was fantastic. He did everything. He was a superstar. He did everything we needed to do. Life was good. We kept growing. We went C, G, who'd you know? They gave us T. And the thing about it was they were all Oxford Blues, sports players, white guys who were super well trained. Like, they all did an amazing job. And so, this is where I think good enough really drives a lot of things. If you can hire the kid out of, Imperial or Stanford or MIT or whatever, and they just fit the mold in a generic, quick hit sense, why search harder? Why expend the extra effort if what you've got is good enough? I know, aging myself, there was a Fat Boy Slim album a bunch of years ago. Had this, big sort of, lumpy guy with a brown T-shirt said, "I'm number one, so why try harder?" This is sort of a lot of people just, you've got what you need, so why try harder? And so I think there's really interesting opportunity here. For the firms that really embrace the notion of diversity, see the market opportunity, well, you could finance jargon, arbitrage opportunity, to figure out what's the best way to attract more diverse talent, so you have more qualified voices in the room, so you're actually a step ahead. I think this is why sort of, a lot of firms have an opportunity in my mind. It's a strategic opportunity to improve their labor pool by just being more open-minded about who fits in and just spending the extra time. Could we have found someone better than C, G, and T? Maybe. They were really good. They were really good. But I'll tell you, the team fleshed out. We had you know, a Pakistani guy joined the team, an Indian guy joined the team, an Israeli woman joined the team, and it was a much more diverse group very quickly on that basis. We had a lot of other things going on. But I think a lot of what we deal with as in this space is that people, all the firms we work with were making a lot of money before they started focusing on diversity. If you took away all the you know, the storm and fury and fun of diversity and inclusion, most of these firms would be making money. The firms that actually choose to go over the hump and actually develop that talent are doing one of two things. They're paying lip service to some issue that's out there, or they've generally said, this is good for us. There's a business case here. And I genuinely believe that there's a very clear business case for it. But there are a lot of other things you know, going on behind the scenes. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt, but we have 5 minutes left, and I do want people to get some time to ask questions.
Yeah.
That's
So
okay with you?
the idea of this laundry list was that we could break at any time. So
yes.
by all means, please.
Perfect. So like I said, we have about 5 minutes for you guys to ask any questions. Thanks a lot for the presentation. I found it really interesting. My one kicking off question is, you mentioned like law firms, investment banking, traditional banking are much further ahead than, you know, tech companies and other. So what lessons would you say like a Google or other companies that are in the beginning of the journey could take for the more established ones?
The number one thing I think is run towards difference. If you see something that's different, don't run it with a pitchfork. Run it with, you know, run towards it. Open yourself to it. You know, I had a sort of an irascible Turkish cab driver on the way out to Heathrow this morning, and he had a lot of strong opinions about a lot of stuff, and I didn't agree with a lot of it. But I was really glad to have that conversation because I learned a whole bunch of stuff about Turkey and the situation there, and he was a little bit, you know, out there, but I was ready to have that conversation because I was going to learn something. So, you know, I don't know how that works in sort of tech world per se, because you have so many different parts of your business. But you know, I would say run towards diversity, run towards difference, and that's at all levels. Internally, if you know, I think I had my eyes open in particular. I live in this space, I work in this space, I breathe and sleep this, but I was still myself, you know, taken aback the first time I met, you know, sort of a transgendered person. That was just different, really different for me. But how cool is that? And I think if you sort of reach out and sort of bring people into the fold, you're only going to learn, an institution will only learn from that, and you're bringing in people from other sectors that are only going to add value. I mean, it used to be in the U.S. Midwest years ago. It used to be Swedes versus Norwegians, right? I mean, this is there's all manner of talent out there. You just need to open your minds to it, and I think Google's well on the way from all the conversations I have, frankly.
Hi, thank you. I have a question regarding your operations. So if you started like in the US and then you moved to the UK, those two markets are very much developed in terms of apprenticeships and graduate schemes. So it's kind of, I'm not gonna say it's easy, but it's easier compared to other markets to, you know, just get the talent, recruit, you know, talented young people from different backgrounds and then get them into the right companies. Now, if you wanna, you know, expand and scale to other markets, you mentioned Bogota, Kabul, I don't know, any others. How do you want to start that? How do you want to shape it? Because a lot of those companies are not prepared to get, you know, young guys that, let's say, don't have all the skills, so that needs to be trained and invest in training. How do you want to approach this?
It's very straightforward in my mind. You've defined the victory conditions are you need a small set of sponsors who are willing to buy into the notion. You don't need everybody. You need here it was 5 firms in 2000, now it's 60 plus. A small number of firms that get it, and a talent pool that you feel you can access readily enough and assemble enough paid or volunteer support to train them enough such that your training makes a difference. So much of what is required to succeed in a corporation has to do with showing up on time, dealing with feedback as it comes, and not things that don't require a huge amount of intervention. And if you're able to sort of put together a training program around that particularly, and you have a few people who buy into that, you've got a program. I mean, the question of sustainability and scale comes in. That's where you set your victory conditions. Do you want 10 firms or 5 firms? Do you want them contributing 1,000 euros or 25,000 euros each? I think just doing the raw numbers, our average sponsorship across all of our firms is just under £20,000. I wouldn't expect that to be, the situation in day one in Kabul, but certainly in our Accra program in Africa, in Ghana, that is operating at a much smaller scale than we operate at. But they've got 60-something kids going through that program every year. It's fantastic. It's really fantastic. So totally doable in almost any market. But it does have to be modified to the country.
One Jamaican to another, you're welcome. I have a question, so just in relation to countries like Jamaica, where your problems, education is at the further end of the spectrum, you're thinking about basic things like food and survival. How do you then get countries such as Jamaica and others to that level where they can even see that the importance of education and then moving up the ladder in terms of like career and so on?
Okay, so there's actually 2 answers to that. One of them has to do with this question of de-risking at risk. This is not, Google, it's not clear to me, is going to be institutionally equipped, and I'm happy to be told otherwise, to take someone on who has a long criminal record with multiple drug offenses or this or that, the other. Someone is not going to make it no matter how much you intervene, because the resources to get someone up that curve, to get into that position, it's just not effective. And we're dealing with profit-based companies at the end of the day. So there's sort of an 80-20 rule. And can you get, with that 20% of effort, can you get the 80% of impact? And if you're going for people who are genuinely struggling at the ends of the earth, that's just a really hard problem to solve. And I'll be perfectly upfront and say that SEO London doesn't have the resource to do that. We're not funded to do that. That being said, I did try and start up SEO Jamaica not too long ago, probably about 2004. And we managed to get we managed to get Q, from a really rough part of Kingston, to get a job at UBS in New York, transforming her potential at some point. Ultimately, it wasn't sustainable because the structure that program had structural issues, overly reliant on the US visa situation as a first point. But we had another effort where we tried to make it an indigenous effort, and we had, and I'm forgetting the gentleman's name, he's a billionaire, I should remember billionaires' names, but we had, he's a Jamaican-born guy, lives in Canada, and he owns a couple of the banks and a few other things. He came down and we sat in a room with myself, him, and a few other young Jamaican entrepreneurs, and we said, how can we use this SEO model and deploy it in Kingston? And this guy, he said, I'll give you half the money, but you guys got to go do the rest of the work to fund it. And I was living in London at the time, and I wasn't going to be doing this full time. He was supplying half the funds. I had to look at the rest of the folks around the table. They had to be willing. They weren't willing. By virtue of they had other stuff to do. It wasn't their problem in their mind. It takes will. The money. This is a concept whose time has come. It's not hard to copy and paste it. The barriers to entry in that sense are low as anything. Anybody can set up a program. You can even set up a sustainable program if your maintenance levels are humble enough. But it takes will. The only way we're able to do it in London in the first instance was I was willing. I had a little bit of resource. I had some credibility in my profession. And I had a list of about 20 American expats running around London who were bored and looking for something to do. And ultimately were committed to what we were doing, and were able to back up that effort. So to do it in Jamaica or Puerto Rico or wherever, it's all doable. All doable.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. I've been told this is the last question, so I hope it's a good one.
Be the best one.
Make it the best, exactly. Thank you again for your time. Brilliant. You've talked about well just there, and earlier you talked about how diversity wasn't a thing back in the 2000s. Maybe C-level knew, and now there's lots of different teams.
Indeed.
Between it, and so definitely something that I've seen at Google. Perhaps others have seen it at Google or in the different roles. But how do you get well, or how do you inspire well, or get people who are in the middle, who are not in HR, for example, but perhaps actually hiring managers, leaders within the business? They're not C-level, they're not junior like I am, for example, but they have the potential to really make an impact on diversity. But because there are other priorities, targets, business goals, so on and so forth, it seems that diversity or inclusion gets pushed down. But how do you get well from the middle teams? Because from my perspective, that's where you can have the biggest impact. Because if they make it important, then it kind of cascades down. So I'd be interested to get your perspective on that.
Yeah. If I could rephrase the question slightly, as how can folks who are sort of mid-tier, in mid-career, make impact and sort of drive change in the organization by raising attention to it? It takes a tiny bit of courage. I know so many people who are in positions of influence, sort of mid-career folks, who have been able to walk into a room and say, why can't we do more of this? Why can't we have, if the topic is diversity or if the topic is Marmite, why can't we do more of this? It takes that ounce of political courage inside the organization to feel like you're not going to get kicked out the room and lose your bonus check at the end of the year for trying to advance your own agenda of a sort. The firms that get it right are the ones that are open to those kinds of conversations, where you're not penalized for asking for some sort of change around you. But I tell you, when people do it, I know a fellow in Boston who he had a role in recruiting, and he said, listen, we need to get more diversity in this firm. I'm going to make it happen. He just went out and just created a cohort of diversity in that organization just by virtue of his deliberate action and effort. And he didn't get penalized for it, so he kept doing it. And he said, I'm going to keep doing it until they tell me not to do it. And now there's a whole, as I say, cohort of talent that's been given access to that corporate world, which are now splintered off and gone into 100 different things over the years. I mean, this is a long time ago. But he had to have the wherewithal to just do that. In terms of inspiring it, as opposed to sort of putting your own neck on the line, because it's always clever to have it be someone else's idea. There are people all around who are coming up the hard way. Many of them are invisible, but many of them, if you just probe just a little bit, you'll find that they are your strongest allies. We were at a firm not too long ago, and a senior partner in the real estate practice there. Real estate is like tough as nails. You guys think tech is hard. Real estate, that's a brutal business. This guy is a partner at a major law firm running that practice. He broke down in tears when talking about how he had come up. And that's what a great ally to find and tap into. If you start to know the stories of the people around you, you're going to find that not everyone had it easy. And if you can get their stories out, that's a way to have sort of the empathy and the sympathy that you can need to then, when you bring your business case forward and say why this is a good idea, you have support behind you. And you don't bring just yourself and your own neck on the line, but you bring a little bit more than that to the table. So yeah, I hope that wasn't too random, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew.